Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nearly 7 years ago, 2017, when Mnangagwa and company staged their military coup, although they insisted in calling it a military-assisted transition. They wanted to give the impression that Zimbabwe has changed. They even went to the extent of calling it a second republic, divorced, to emphasize the move from the Mugabe era, the first republic. This was a new thing. 7 years down the line, I think we can honestly say nothing has changed. Indeed, many people would say things are worse. Mugabe had promised the nation mass prosperity. In the 80s, one of his famous phrases was gutsa, ruzhinji, mass prosperity. And he gave his long-winded speeches about scientific socialism and how it was going to deliver mass prosperity. But after the first decade, people begin to doubt what is going on. By the late 1990s, I think many people could see instead of mass prosperity, we're heading for mass poverty. And by the time Mnangagwa staged and friends staged their military coup in 2017, there was not any doubt that Zimbabwe was a failed state. And so Mnangagwa stepped in the hope that he would deliver a different Zimbabwe. Indeed, his opening mantra was Zimbabwe is open for business. He was convinced he was going to take Zimbabwe to a new, different level of mass prosperity. He soon came up with his Vision 2030, which basically is saying Zimbabwe by the year 2030 would become an upper middle income nation. That is now proving to be a mirage. 7 years after the military coup, there is not even the signs of any meaningful economic recovery. Indeed, if anything, the economy nosedive has continued. Corruption has never been this bad. And on the political front, the repression is in overdrive. Mnangagwa promised zero tolerance on corruption in 2017 after the military coup. Corruption has gone into overdrive. He promised to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Last year's elections were so blatantly rigged that even the regional body, SADC and the AU, had to step in and condemn the process as flawed and illegitimate. Everyone can see that this vision 2030 is a mirage. And in typical Zanu PF style, the regime's response to it is to bombard the nation with propaganda. Mesmerizing, isn't it? But mesmerizing as it may be, the truth of the matter is Zimbabwe is in serious economic trouble. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And no amount of propaganda can convince people that their lives are getting better when they can see with their own eyes that their lives is as miserable now as it was during Mugabe's time, if not worse. So we are faced here with a regime that think it can mesmerize people, bamboozle them into believing that there is economic progress when there is none, that their lives are getting better when their lives are getting worse. I think the level of propaganda, in my view, is a sign that the regime itself can see that it has failed. And so it has cranked up the volume of propaganda for no other purpose other than to drown out the reality on the ground. Zimbabwe is a failed state. The so-called First Republic was, bad as it was, better than this Second Republic. The country is in serious economic and political trouble. And no amount of propaganda can change that simple reality. Mnangagwa is in the habit of dismissing all his political opponents as puppets. But he himself is the biggest puppet of all. There's no denying that at the heart of the wholesale looting that is taking place in Zimbabwe are the Chinese and the Russians. And he is just their puppet dancing to their tune. The hectic activity by Mnangagwa and his followers is proof the regime is in a panic. We have just held an election, and yet the level of propaganda by Mnangagwa and his followers is as if we are heading for elections in a few months' time. That is how desperate the regime is, to drown out the truth. But let me say it here, that no amount of propaganda would mesmerize or bamboozle everyone all the time. The regime has managed to bamboozle and mesmerize some of the people all the time. And it has managed to do that with some of the people some of the time. But the idea that it can somehow mesmerize the whole population is far-fetched. Indeed, the reality on the ground is becoming so self-evident that the regime knows that even those gullible individuals are beginning to doubt all this propaganda. Zimbabwe is facing an economic and political crisis. And I believe we should focus our minds on 2028. By 2028, as much as Mnangagwa would want to sell his idea that he is on course to deliver his vision 2030, everybody would see that that is a lie. We as the people should focus our minds on making sure that Mnangagwa does not use the same dirty tactics that he used last year to bribe all the key players in the election process, from buying Povo chicken and chips, buying chiefs, twin cab trucks, church leaders, giving them gifts of farms and vehicles, bank loans, MPs and senators, housing loans, magistrates, judges, deputy ministers, the same thing. Mnangagwa spent a cool $5 billion on bribes alone last year. He even bribed the opposition to make sure that they participate, and they conned their followers to participate in their millions. Our task should be to make sure that people do not fall for that trap again. Let Mnangagwa bribe the opposition to participate. He did not bribe the ordinary Zimbabweans because they have absolutely nothing to gain from this Second Republic. Things are getting worse, not better. And our biggest fight back is to stop participating in the flawed elections, to give the process legitimacy. That is our strength, and we should work on our strength. I'll just show a comment from one of the listeners out there. Glot. Be it as it may, how can we as the people rectify this situation? Well, I've just said it. The biggest problem we made last year was to believe Nelson Chamisa's blatant lie that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. And so we participated in the elections. And by participating, we gave the process legitimacy. I know that SADC have not come out and said why did they accept the damning report of the election observer team and yet decided to do nothing about it. In my view, the reason for doing nothing about it is simple. The opposition in Zimbabwe had participated in those flawed elections, knowing fully well that they're flawed. And if we go back in history, the opposition, MDC, CCC, had the golden opportunity to implement reforms to stop the rigging. They did not. We, the people, should have known that. We, the people, should have known that the election process was flawed. God knows, 24 years of this MDC, CCC playing these dirty tricks we should have learned by now. We did not. And when 2 million of Zimbabweans participate in the elections to vote for Chamisa, and I can guess that 3 to 4 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora cheered and applauded the participation, that left SADC, at least those SADC leaders who were reluctant to punish Zanu PF anyway, with an excuse not to do so. If Zimbabweans are happy to participate in a flawed election, who are we to condemn those election process? But by accepting the report, I think it showed that there are some SADC leaders who would have wanted to go further. And indeed, it is no secret that ANC in South Africa was one of the SADC nations that did not want to punish Zanu PF for rigging the elections. But as we know, ANC lost its majority in the 29th May 2024 elections. South Africa is now a different country. Zanu PF knows that. We should know that. And so the prospect of Zanu PF rigging 2028, it has got the money to do so, and also the prospect of the opposition participating in those flawed elections, I think I would not bet against it that Chamisa and company would participate in those flawed elections. For the simple reason that they cannot resist the bait that Zanu PF is offering. What we, the ordinary Zimbabweans, should avoid is being conned into those election processes by lies from the likes of Chamisa, saying that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. This was not the first time. In 2018, he participated in those elections after telling another lie that MDC has stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. We believed him then, just as we believed him last year. And all I'm saying is we should stop being so naive and gullible. Free, fair, and credible elections is our biggest strength as ordinary citizens. And Zanu PF knows that rigging the elections is one thing, getting away with it is another. That is the soft underbelly of the monster. And we should be smart enough to attack the regime where it is weakest. We do not have to participate in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. This whole idea that once you've participated, you can somehow stage street protests to remove the regime is, to say the least, naive. Why did you participate in the flawed election in the first place? I think we should be a lot smarter this time. Our target should be 2028, and we should make it very clear now that we are not going to participate in those flawed elections without reforms. Zanu PF is already in a panic on Vision 2030. The regime knows it's not going to deliver that. The economy is in a mess. But the regime is counting on if it can rig the elections again, it can somehow get away with it. What we should make sure of is that the regime is not able to get away with it. And one way of making sure that that is the case is making it abundantly clear that we are not going to participate in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. SADC would have not given Zanu PF legitimacy last year if nearly 2 million Zimbabweans had not participated in those flawed elections, voting for Chamisa. If the 3 to 4 million Zimbabweans in the diaspora had condemned the election process from the word go. Instead, many of them cheered and applauded and encouraged people to participate. You participate and you lose. You've got to take the consequences. And we should take those consequences now. This idea of somehow we can stage street protests to remove the regime is just nonsensical. SADC, for instance, is not going to revisit the SADC election report and come back and say Mnangagwa is illegitimate. They should have made that decision last year. They didn't, for whatever reason. They're not going to revisit it. And those who are making a big song and dance about the SADC protests next month are just wasting their time. They should be focusing on reforms. That should be the number one goal we should be aiming for. I believe Zanu PF is in a panic, and for good reason. Propaganda can only go this far. You cannot convince blind men that you can convince a blind man that there is sump in his rice meal. But you cannot do the same with hot chilies. The people of Zimbabwe are not going to be fooled that Zanu PF is on course to deliver Vision 2030. And by 2028, that will be abundantly clear to all. Zanu PF is trying to drown out with all these gimmicks that the regime is on course to delivering Vision 2030, to drown out the stories of corruption and gross mismanagement that is taking place. When a country is losing 80% of its gold to smugglers, the same with its diamonds, the same with its lithium, that's when you realize that we are in serious trouble. Economic prosperity in the face of all that looting? Possible. Let Zanu PF continue with his propaganda, and it's getting pretty desperate. The puppet is dancing vigorously, trying to pretend that it is in charge, it knows what it's doing, but the reality on the ground speaks volumes. If Mugabe was a puppet, Mnangagwa is an even bit bigger puppet. We can change Zimbabwe. And I think that is the number one message I would want to send out to the people of Zimbabwe today and for the next 4 years. We just have got to be smart. And the smartest thing we can do is stop believing some of the blatant lies that we should participate in a flawed election because Chamisa has plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. That was dumb. And we should never repeat that mistake ever again. Thank you very much for joining me today, and have a good afternoon.